So my name is Mary Grossman. I'm a Ph.D. candidate at Virginia Tech, and I'm going to talk to you today about Echinacea and some research that we've done looking at growth control using Daylength and PGRs. So just to get us started, Echinacea is a genus of 9 species. Echinacea purpurea is the most common, most well-known of the species. It's a native plant. It's native to most of the United States. It's a really popular plant. It has a long flowering season. It's used in cut flowers and dried flowers. It's attractive to wildlife. It does have some medicinal uses. We won't be addressing that today. So hybridization in Echinacea began about 20 years ago between the different species of Echinacea. And what this did was introduce a lot of variation in color and form. The colors are more intense. There's a big variety of colors, reds, yellows, pinks, all kinds of colors. There are different flowered forms, and some of them have been bred to be a dwarf Echinacea. So there's a lot of interest in Echinacea just because there's so much variety available right now. However, some of the hybrids have some production challenges. In production, some of the hybrids do not branch well, which leads to as you can see on the right, sort of a tall, spindly plant that doesn't really fill the pot. Some of them take a long time to finish. There have been reports of plants that don't overwinter well. And flowering problems. Premature flowering has been a problem in our research. So we wanted to look at some of these production issues in our research. So I'm going to go over with you a couple of our previous studies and then talk to you about our most recent study using Photoperiod and PGRs. So one of our first studies we did with Echinacea hybrids was looking at branching compounds. We looked at 3 different PGRs. We used dicagolic sodium, which at the time was Augio. We used ethifon and benzyladenine, which is the active ingredient in Configure. And we applied these as foliar sprays just after transplant and then again 2 weeks later. And in this research, we used 3 different cultivars, Marmalade, Hot Papaya, and Harvest Moon. And benzyladenine, or Configure, was successful in increasing the number of branches in all 3 cultivars. You can see the BA is in yellow, and the untreated control is the purple. So we had an increase in branches in all 3 cultivars, and 2 of them we had increased flower stalks as well. So BA was successful in increasing branches in Echinacea hybrids. We did have, during the study, some irregular flowering, and we also saw the need for height control. So these plants at the bottom of the screen, this is Marmalade, and you can see some of them just didn't flower. The labels are missing, but the one on the very right, that's the one that was treated with BA. So you can see there are a lot of increases in branches, but we had no flowering in many of those. Also, you can see the ones that did flower are very tall, so we decided we needed to look into height control. So in our next study, we were looking at 2 different cultivars. We used 3 PGRs, uniconazole, paclobutrazol, and diminizide. And we used different methods of application. So we used a spray rate applied twice, a high rate applied once, or a drench. And this is our first cultivar, Harvest Moon. This research was presented last year in the webinar, and I believe that is on the website, but I just wanted to briefly go over it. Harvest Moon was responsive to all of our PGRs. We had reduced height with all of the treatments. We did have the best results with the uniconazole high spray and the paclobutrazol drench, excuse me. We had a different story, however, in Marmalade. Marmalade is a taller cultivar, it's very vigorously growing, and you can see that the only PGR that affected height was diminizide. That's at the bottom next to the untreated control. But you can see that even though the plant is much shorter, we had a reduction in number of flowers, which is not a positive response. So we had a difference in PGR response between the different cultivars. Diminizide did reduce height in Marmalade, but it came with reductions in flowering. And Harvest Moon responded best to the uniconazole sprays, the paclo drench, or the diminizide. But we did want to continue looking into Echinacea hybrids because in this study, again, we had inconsistent flowering. We had premature flowering, and by that I mean flowering just after transplant, you know, from when the liners are transplanted to the finished containers. So when the plants flower so soon, they don't have a chance to really bulk up and fill the pot, and that was a problem in this study. Also, we noticed we haven't seen a lot of research on some of the newer cultivars, and we wanted to look at some of the differences since we've seen different responses to the height control PGRs. We wanted to look at the different cultivar responses. So when we were thinking about designing our next study, we looked at some research that was out there on how to encourage consistent flowering in Echinacea. So one study in 2001 looked at Echinacea and determined that intermediate day lengths, that's providing light between 13 and 15 hours, or long days with night interruption, that those two photoperiods encouraged the soonest flowering. In that study, flowering was found to be inhibited in short days of you know, light less than 12 hours or in continuous light. Another study we looked at had a similar had similar conclusions, but a little bit different. So in this study, 2004, short days, a period of short days followed by a period of long days was found to encourage flowering in Echinacea. Also, similarly, the intermediate day length was also found to encourage fastest flowering. And flowering, again, was found to be inhibited under continuous short days or continuous long days. Now, one thing that interested us, both of these studies were, the research was conducted on liners after transplant. So after the plants were transplanted, then the photoperiods were applied. So we found in our research that many of the problems we were having we were having premature flowering in liners just after transplant, and we felt like some of the things that were happening in our research were due to things that happened during the liner stage. And so we decided in this study that we wanted to look at what photoperiod should we grow the liners under so that when those plants grow out, we have consistent flowering and we prevent any premature flowering. And also we wanted to look at and understand the growth and PGR responses of some newer hybrid cultivars. Okay, so we set up, this is our new research 2016, we set up a study that looked at three main factors: photoperiod applied at the liner stage. We used 3 different day lengths, 10, 16, or 24 hours. And then we applied, the plants were either applied height control PGRs with or without. And we looked at 21 different hybrid cultivars. So on the right, you can see there's a picture of, that's what the plants looked like when they came in. They were stage 3 tissue culture, and they were in gel. Below that, you can see there are 3 carts there. The way we applied the photoperiod is we had LED lights on each shelf of the cart, and they were open during the day for 10 hours. After 10 hours, the lights in the 10-hour photoperiod went off, and we covered the carts in a light-blocking cloth. And then the lights in the 16-hour photoperiod went off after 16 hours, and then the lights in the 24-hour photoperiod were lit continuously. So just a little more discussion about how the study was set up. So we started with tissue culture transplant, and I do want to mention that I'd like to thank AB Cultivars and Battlefield Farms for their generous donation of plant materials and supplies. So we transplanted our tissue culture on March 2nd. Then we moved into the liner production phase of the project. We grew the plants for 10 weeks. They were grown in cell packs, and this is the time period when we applied the photoperiods. Also during this time, we applied BA to all the plants because we wanted to have well-branched plants. We applied height control PGRs in the liner stages as needed to those plants in the height control PGR treatment groups. And at that time, we used either 1 or 2 foliar sprays of diminicide. We wanted to use diminicide in the liner stage. So we felt like at that stage we needed, you know, diminicide has it's a little bit less active than some of the more potent PGRs, and we felt that that would be appropriate during the liner stage. So that's why we chose that. Then after 10 weeks, the plants were transplanted into quart or gallon-sized pots, just depending on the size of the finished plants. And we grew them for between 5 and 10 weeks more. We grew them until they were flowering. And at this time, all of the plants were under a natural day length. For us, that was 14 hours. We grew them in Blacksburg, Virginia. And we did, after transplant, we applied additional applications of height-controlled PGRs as needed. And at this time, we did 1 or 2 foliar sprays of uniconazole. We wanted to use uniconazole at this time so we'd have a little bit more of an active, a little bit stronger PGR, but also we wanted to avoid any problems with reductions in flowering that we had seen in Diminicide. So this is what the plants looked at during the different stages. On the left, you can see this is, we're transplanting the stage 3 tissue culture. In the middle, you can see this is during liner production. The plants were grown on these carts, and the bottom photo shows the liners when they're finished and ready to be transplanted. And then on the right, you can see the plants during production, and the ones that are flowering, those are about at harvest time. So I'm going to talk about, before I go into the results, these are the cultivars we used. We had 21 cultivars. We had a great variety of flower form and color, so it was a lot of fun to do this research because they were just such beautiful plants. So I'm going to talk about the results first in the liner stage. So this data was taken when the liners were finished and ready to be transplanted. And I'm going to talk about cultivar effects towards the end, and I'll mention any cultivars that are different, but just for the sake of time, we're going to combine all the cultivars together when we're talking about these results. So these are averages of all the cultivars. So across the bottom, we have our 3 different photoperiods, so 10 hour, 16, or 24 hour. And this is looking at the height of the liners in response to their treatments. So you can see the plants in the 24-hour treatment are taller than those in the 16 and 10 hour. In the blue, we have those plants which did not receive any height control treatments. In the red, we have the plants that did receive height control PGRs. So the plants in the 16 and 24 hours that did receive height control PGRs are shorter than the ones that did not. You can see in the 10-hour photoperiod group that there's no difference between those plants in height. And the explanation for that is at that time, the 10-hour plants hadn't grown tall enough to need any height control PGRs, so they weren't applied at that time. So the 24 hour is the tallest, then the 16, and the 10 hour is much shorter than both of those. Okay, so looking at width, the width of the liners had a very similar response to height. The 24-hour plants were the widest compared to the 16, and then the 10-hour plants were the least wide. And the plants that had height control PGRs were less wide than the plants that did not have any height control PGRs. Okay, we're going to look at number of branches in our liners. Now at this time, height control PGRs did not have an effect on the branches, so we're just looking at the effect of photoperiod here. So the plants in the 16 and 24-hour photoperiods had more branches than the plants in the 10-hour photoperiod. And then we looked at roots. We did a visual rating of roots. You can see the rating from 1 to 5 along the bottom. That's how we did the rating. So at this time, again, height control did not have an effect on rooting, so I'm just presenting the photoperiod effects here. And this slide, for some reason, is, I apologize, reversed. The 10 hours on the right. So you can see that the plants in the 10-hour photoperiod had reduced root rating compared to the ones in the 24 or 16-hour photoperiod. And just to show you what these plants looked like, on top we have a cultivar called Julia, and this is what the liners looked like at finished, and when they were ready to transplant, you can see the height differences between the 16 and 24 and between the with height control and without. And you can see the 10-hour plant is much smaller than the ones in the longer photoperiods. Along the bottom, we have a cultivar called Hot Papaya, and I wanted to show this slide. I'm hoping you can see that there are fewer roots visible in the 10-hour plants compared to those in the 16 and 24-hour plants. Okay, and one other result I wanted to report as far as liners go, the 10-hour photoperiod reduced the root rating in 2 cultivars enough that they were delayed. So as I said, the liners were grown for 10 weeks, but the plants in these 2 cultivars needed an additional 2 weeks in the plants grown in the 10-hour photoperiod. And then after 2 weeks, they were ready to be transplanted, and we went along with them. So that was just 2 out of the 21 cultivars that had a real delay in the 10-hour photoperiod. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about what happened after the liners were transplanted and grown into finish. I'll start with the results from the photoperiod treatment, then I'll talk about the results of height control PGRs, and then at the end I'll talk a little bit about the differences we saw in cultivars. Okay, so just as a reminder, the photoperiod was only applied in the liner stage, and after transplant, all the plants were grown in a 14-hour day length. So the photoperiod applied in the liner stage did not have an effect in finished plants on the height, width, number of branches or flower stalks, or in the market rating of the finished plants. So we saw all of these results in the liners where we had differences in height and width due to photoperiod, but in the finished plants there was not a significant difference in that. Also, I wanted to mention we did not have any premature flowering in the study at all in any of the treatments. So that's good. We don't want to have premature flowering, but at the same time we were trying to look into what causes it. And so what we found out with this study is that it's not solely photoperiod is not causing the premature flowering. So the premature flowering we saw in other studies must have had other causes. Okay, so the liner photoperiod in finished plants did have an effect on days to flower. So you can see on the left chart, the 16-hour plants in the 16-hour photoperiod flowered soonest, about 4 days faster than the plants in the 10-hour photoperiod. And then the plants in the 24-hour photoperiod another 4 days later. So the plants in the 16-hour photoperiod flowered soonest. And also we did have an effect on shoot weight. So even though height and width were not affected in finished plants, shoot weight was. So the plants in the 24-hour photoperiod had the greatest shoot weight, and then followed by the 16-hour photoperiod, and then the 10-hour photoperiod had the least shoot weight. We did have reduced flowering in longer photoperiods, but this was only found in 3 cultivars. And when I say that, really, the first 2 cultivars, it was a very minor effect. Maybe 5 to 10% of those plants didn't flower. But in the 3rd cultivar, Marmalade, none of the plants in the 16-hour or 24-hour photoperiod, either with or without height control PGRs, flowered. They didn't even bud. There was no buds at the end of the study. We just had to, after a few months and everything else was done, we decided they were not going to bud. So as I said, this was only seen in 3 cultivars, but really we had it, the biggest effect was in Marmalade, which, and I don't have an explanation as to why this happened, because the 10-hour ones did flower, and all of the other cultivars we didn't see this response. So this was just in Marmalade. Okay, so moving on to the effects of the height control PGRs in the finished plants. Again, we used diminazide once or twice as liners, and then uniconazole once or twice after transplant. And in finished plants, we did not see an effect on width, shoot weight, or flowering. But we did see a response in height and in branches. The plants that were treated with height control PGRs, that's the HC+, those were shorter than the plants without height control PGRs. And number of branches was reduced in plants treated with height control PGRs compared to those without. Now I do want to mention this was a statistical significant, there's a statistical difference here, But practically speaking, the difference between 8 branches and 10 branches in an Echinacea, these were well-branched plants, so it may not have been of practical significance, even though it was statistically significant. Okay, height control PGR also affected days to flower, so the plants with PGRs flowered about 6 days later than the ones without. And also we did see a significant increase in market rating. The plants with PGRs had a higher rating than those without. I do want to mention that those results we just talked about were an average for all of the cultivars, but there were some cultivars that height control did not significantly affect height, and I've listed those here. These tended to be some of the larger ones, some of the more aggressively growing ones. You know, with PGR application in Echinacea, it's really important to get the timing right and to apply the PGR just as the flower stems are starting to elongate over the canopy of the plant. And I think for some of these we may have been too late in our application. And also we use the same rate for all of the cultivars, and I feel like a higher rate might be more effective in some of these very tall cultivars. Okay, so this is, I just wanted to show a photo. This is one of the tallest cultivars. This is Southern Belle. So you can see they definitely do need some more PGR work. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about some of the effects of cultivar in this research. So cultivar, we saw a big difference between the cultivars in days to flower. So this is calculated from the date of transplant to the finished containers. And you can see that we had a really wide difference here. Some of the plants flowered, you know, 30, 35, 36, 38 days after transplant, and then some of them, the longest one took to flower was Avalanche, took 70 days. So that's a really big difference. Some of them took just over a month, and some were 2.5 months. So I think that's really important to know, you know, that there can be such a difference in how long it's going to take to flower. And also we saw a big variety in height. This is not very surprising. Some of these are bred to be quite short. Our height was anywhere from 93 centimeters. The shortest one was 34. So big variety in cultivar height we saw in this study. Okay, I'm going to talk about just a few of the cultivars. I don't really have time to go through all of them, but I'm going to talk about just a couple that really stood out in my mind. The first one I'm going to talk about is raspberry truffle. This one is not one of my favorites. It has a really beautiful flower. You can see it's sort of a peachy, salmony flower. But this one was more susceptible to powdery mildew. Now, I didn't really talk about disease. We had very low disease pressure. A few plants had some powdery mildew, and this was one that we had to treat more than once. It seemed more susceptible. Also, the form on this one, we did end up having to stake them, and some of them just kind of grew sideways. They just had an awkward form. They just weren't as pleasing as some of them. And then another thing I wanted to mention about this one, I haven't talked about leaf damage or phytotoxicity, but we did have some in this study. We can't really directly attribute its cause because we saw it in plants both with and without PGRs. So I hesitate to call it phytotoxicity, but we did have some twisted leaves, some different leaf damages. Most of the plants, 99% grew out of this leaf damage during the course of production, and you couldn't see it in the finished plants. But this cultivar did have some leaf damage at the end. So for these reasons, this was not my favorite one to work with. I did want to talk about Avalanche. I really like Avalanche. It's very well branched, nice white flowers on nice stiff stems. The reason I'm mentioning it is you can see it's quite tall. This is one of the ones that we really didn't have success with the PGR application, and I'd like to try it again and with some different higher rates maybe. But this one was only supposed to be 15 to 18 inches tall, and as you can see, it got much taller than that. So I feel like this is one, if I had known it was going to be this tall, I probably would have been maybe more aggressive with the PGR treatments. Okay, Blushing Meadow Mama. I really like this one. This is one of the newest ones we trialed, and I think it came out maybe within the last year. There's a series of Meadow Mama Echinacea on the Plant Nouveau website if you want to look them up. I really like this one. It had really nice foliage. The flowering, each flower stalk had multiple flower stalks. And you can see this is one that was really responsive to PGRs. So overall, I really like this new series, and this one was one of our favorites. Julia and Orange Skipper. I wanted to mention these. I really like both of them. They both are really full plants, nice dark green foliage, and beautiful, really eye-catching orange flowers. They are different in some ways, but I have to say, if they're right next to each other, they're really hard to tell apart. They're about the same color, but both really nice plants. Butterfly Kisses, I wanted to mention this one real briefly just because it was one of my favorites. This one's been on the market for a while, and many of you may be familiar with it. But this one was just such a nice plant. It's very full. It did respond to PGRs, but it was okay without it. And just overall, just a really pleasing plant, and I really like this one. These are another two of my favorites. Rainbow Marcella is the one on top. It's got this kind of pink to orange coloring, and I just really liked it. Had a really nice form and color. Purple Emperor, it's a really nice bright magenta, really eye-popping color, and I also really liked its form and color as well, so I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so just to sum up this research, we found that liner photoperiod did reduce growth in finished liners in liners that were grown in the 10-hour photoperiod. In finished plants, we found that liner photoperiod delayed flowering in the 10 and the 24-hour photoperiods, and that the plants in the 16-hour day length flowered soonest. We did find that high control PGRs are needed in most cultivars of Echinacea and that they improved market rating. But we also saw that timing is very important, and we may need to look at higher rates for some of the taller cultivars. And in looking at all these different cultivars, we did see a lot of differences in form and in days to flower. And that's all I wanted to talk about with you today, and I'm going to pass it along to Joyce. And again, we'll be taking questions at the end.